Welcome to the Therapist Uncut podcast, where off-the-clock therapists who happen to be friends share their uncensored thoughts about real life. Join us weekly in spreading positivity and making mental health relatable through casual conversation, inspirational stories, and real talk with friends who happen to be therapists. Please welcome your co-hosts, Nikki Young and Alyssa Nahara.
Therapist Uncut crew, Nick Young here with my fabulous co-host, Alyssa Nahara, and her childhood friend, John David, who, if you go back, we actually previously had on Therapist Uncut. So check it out for a phenomenal episode. I am super stoked. We are both super stoked that you are back with us. We so enjoyed talking with you. For those of our listeners who caught our previous episode, they know who you are. But for those that didn't, I'm going to reintroduce you.
Thank you.
All right. So John David Brown is a 35-year-old technologist living in LA, where he leads product development for Perry Street Software, makers of queer dating apps, SCRUFF and Jack'd. I just think that's funny, by the way, the name of that app. Solid choice. He studied politics at Cornell University, sweet deal, and has primarily worked in technology during his professional career. He loves music, traveling, and his cat, Governor. Got to say it like that.
Yes, you do.
Welcome back. We appreciate you being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Alyssa, what are we talking about with John David today? Did we talk about what we're going to talk about?
We
have a plan?
We have a plan. Today, we are going to talk about homophobia in the workplace. And today I hopefully plan on asking lots of questions and doing a lot of listening, because this is not an experience that I know much about. So I'm hoping John David can really shed light for anybody who has ever felt like they have experienced either these blatant things in the workplace or very subtle ways in which it can show up in the workplace. And I think John David, in my head, is a perfect fit for this topic, because John David, if you know him, you know he's brilliant. He's always been brilliant. We've talked about a little bit where that brilliance comes from in the first episode. So go back and listen to that episode. But John David is incredibly smart. And I think we all knew growing up that John David was going to do great things.
Yeah, because he was busy proving it to you.
Because he was busy. Yes, and he proved it very well. So I see John David as successful and in great places. And so to hear this today, it just brings me lots of joy that we also get to share it with all of you. So that's what we're looking forward to today.
Oh, well, way to gas me up. Yeah.
Welcome back.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be back.
And I think, Alyssa, you hit on a key point that I'm going to be interested in hearing about, but the differences between the very, very subtle forms of homophobia that may not, sometimes we as the recipients may not even initially recognize, but definitely observers, and then the more blatant in your face examples.
Absolutely. So, John David, let's get started with what might it look like to have like an unconscious or a conscious bias show up in the workplace that is related to sexuality.
Most people who work in corporate jobs often have some type of training, right, where we learn to identify unconscious bias in ourselves primarily, and in others. It's usually centered around race and gender, the boys club vibe when you have a female colleague, or, I don't know, I guess maybe like stereotypes with race, things like that. But yeah.
You're referring to these often state mandated trainings that HR must put on that unfortunately the large majority of the workforce laughs at and or texts their way through this training.
Did you just say that all in one breath, Nikki?
I did.
You did. Yeah, totally. I know. I mean, people don't get it. The people who need to get it don't.
Exactly.
And
the people that could lead the training are the ones that
that really, really don't need it. I mean, all of us kind of need it. It is important. Intersectionality means you're not going to be absolutely everything that's on that list. Although if you are, please let us know.
We would like to talk with you.
Yeah, sounds hard. Sexuality is slightly different, right? I moved through the world as a white male. like privilege to the max, right? I went to an Ivy League school, like, I've got all of this privilege. So you would think like, well, I just moved through corporate America and I do my thing. And, I have all of these advantages, and I do have all of those advantages. It's true. But sometimes you are at a slight disadvantage, or, just made to feel other or kept out of certain conversations. People sort of fetishize you, I think, in a way, just asking stupid, straight questions about what it is to be gay. It's like, ask your gay.
So like, how do you have sex?
Yeah. How do you know who's the top and who's
Is
the
that
bottom?
a good example of the stupid? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, you want to adopt?
Wait.
Yes.
Gay people have kids?
I know. No, yeah, of course. There's all those things which we move through the world, and but you would expect once you go to work and you sort of meet people that there's some type of understanding, right? But you can never assume that other people know jack about LGBTQIA plus individuals, right? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, so you asked what does it look like? It can look like a lot of different things. Feeling ostracized from the straight men is one that I often feel, right? And there's a lot of straight men working in everywhere.
Corporate America.
So, yeah.
Working in everywhere. Yes.
Yeah. But I think that's a big part of it, right? This boys club. And I think women know exactly what that's like, and they don't look like me, a man. So it's even, it's so much more of a barrier. I can think of an example from one of my past jobs. It was very, very corporate, had been around for a very, very, very long time, like something like 60 years, and looked like they were all very excited about tech. And, then you get in there and you're like, oh, there's cobwebs everywhere. Like they want everything that people say is good about tech, but they don't want to do any of the things to actually get there. That's sort of one of the things, like when you work for sort of an antiquated industry, right? They're all very excited about the possibilities of tech, but the people within are often pretty resistant. So it was already kind of like that, but we were building something new. We were building a mobile app, which is my specialty. And they were hiring other people that worked in the New York tech scene, right? We were sort of a satellite office. There was a lot of cool tech people within that space. However, we were on the same floor as the sales team, right? And people who have these sort of more traditional jobs. And that's where you started to see conflict, right? At first, it was how we dressed, right? In general, they were like, oh, so nice that you guys get to dress so much more relaxed, right? In general. And that was true for all of us. But then it's, oh, you dress so colorful. You're always dressed so colorful. I love it. And you're like, thanks. You could do it too. You'd look great in color. I don't know. The way you do it, it's great. I think it's great. Right. And I think it's great. You're like, okay, cool, whatever. That's a pretty benign one. Right. But you're somehow telling me that I have your approval. Like, that's rude. Hey, just so you know, I'm cool with it. But I'm also going to point out how different it is from all of us. Right. Right. Exactly. Noting the difference, saying that you tolerate it, without saying it. But, maybe that's reading into it, right? It's just an older woman trying to be friendly, doesn't, whatever, complimenting me. I'll take it, So things like that sort of get there. But yeah, they had a lot of problems with my appearance. Obviously, I usually wear a nose ring right here, have some earring, my nails are painted, I might wear something more colorful. And people were constantly stopping by and being like, well, in this industry, it's more traditional to, wear a suit whenever you go and meet the customers, because that's how they do business. And I was like, yeah, I know. What? Telling me that they wear scrubs as doctors. Like, I know what they wear. I'm like, okay. Thank you for telling me, and they were like, so, you might have to, get rid of the extra stuff. I'm like, the extra stuff? What do you mean? Well, I mean, you wouldn't wear that nose ring there, right? I'm like, well, yes, actually. I would actually. Does it bother you? I had one person, one of the people there who was queer, mind you, older, who are also guilty of, go figure, self-loathing, and sort of projecting that onto others. I was a more flouncy type. He was more of the stoic sort of keep things at home type. And he was constantly asking about what I was wearing. And, he had somebody spy on me one time for a client visit. I
have so many questions, but continue.
My gosh. Yeah. One of our salespeople had to report back to him and was like, I don't know. And unfortunately, she said that I was in some hoodie thing. I was wearing like a very waspy, like popped collar, yellow cover thing, and was wearing slacks and nice shoes. And my boss called me, and they were at the headquarters was in another state, and was like, oh, I hate to ask this, but like, what are you wearing? I was like, excuse me? She was like, well, like, what are you wearing? I was like, did you just speak to so-and-so? She was like, well, yeah. I was like, oh my God, he's obsessed with this. I'm wearing a nice top and slacks and shoes. And she was like, okay, well, I don't know how to ask this, but can you send a picture? I was like,
I'm cringing.
I can't believe you're asking me to do that right now. I just told you what I'm wearing. Mm-hmm. It's appropriate. I'm like, did he ask about what the girls were wearing? My like UX researcher and one of the developers. And he was like, no, one of them was wearing jeans, right? I was like, okay. Sent the picture. And she was like, oh, I'm so sorry, John David, you look fine. And then he had like a talking to with that spy that he sent. And this is a whole big thing. And it was all just based on me looking different. And
you living your authentic life.
Exactly. Like, oh, I'm going to be so gay. I'm going to make people feel uncomfortable. We did an internal marketing video, and they point blank had me take this out for an internal marketing video. Like not even public. And so it was just things like that where they felt like this need to control my appearance. I was in a full suit at that one. I was in my full suit, nice shirt up to here, my hair all coiffed perfect. I looked great.
You looked straight? Is that what?
Not quite, I guess.
You gotta flip that ring up. There you go.
Yeah, exactly. So he had me take it out, and I was like, wow, this is very disappointing. And I was like, I'm just surprised. Did you have, are the women wearing jewelry in these videos? He was like, well, yeah. And I was like, well, then why are you asking me to take out mine? And he was like, well, I think you know why. And he wasn't implying that I was gay. He was implying that it was just not, I don't know. But, just wearing things like nail polish, showing that you are different, being out and proud. People notice that, find it different, and then like try to heat seek missile, you to try to curate you for what they think. Like, yes, it's a stuffy industry, but I work in tech and I know what I'm doing. Like I went to school, like check my resume before you tell me how people dress at the office. But yeah, that was one of the major ways that I was facing homophobia, was just these constant comments about my appearance.
And John David, so what I'm hearing from you, because I'm doing a lot of learning, is I'm hearing that you felt singled out based on your appearance, although you were still within the guise of the dress code, but because you were male, that you felt singled out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Would that be an accurate?
Yes. And this one sounds small. I get it. You're like, well, they could not like your nose ring for a variety of reasons, but the insistence on it, and multiple people came to tell me about how I needed to dress to do this thing. It was indicative of other things that were going on, but that was one of the more subtle ones, right? Mm-hmm. These sort of indictments on your appearance. I mean, doing the same thing to women, right? Is, have you checked the length of that skirt? Or like, you're going to need to, wear a shawl or something if you're going to wear that to see the client. Those types of things are microaggressions, right? So there's things like that. And then there's also the other things about people just, asking those dumb questions about your sexuality. And like, you can be like, oh, haha, yeah, answer them a little bit here and there. Like, but asking about your sex life, who raised these people, but it happens all the time that they're just like, they want to talk about you being gay, or, they want the gay BFF at work, or just like straight people who are just, maybe asking questions and stuff. But it's like, we're not here to educate you on something that you need to look into, and it's fine. Sometimes we do, but I don't know. I feel like
and maybe that's maybe a place to pause, is that there are individuals where this is malicious.
Yeah.
There are individuals where this comes from a place of well-intentioned learning, right? Somebody wants to try to learn acceptance, wants to show that. So let's pause there for a second. What could this person do instead of going to, in this case, you, and asking you these questions to learn about something outside of their norm? What can the person do? You alluded to it, but let's spend a little more time there.
What could they do?
Instead of asking you their curiosity questions and trying to learn about queer life or queer sex, that's a very extreme example.
They could ask one of their many queer friends. Oh, wait. They don't have any, right? No, I don't know. I mean, I'm very personable, right? Very bubbly. And so definitely like it makes sense to ask me certain things and be personable with me. I get that. But yeah, I mean, like asking about somebody's sexuality or the dumb questions about, I don't know, just anything. I don't know, Google it, or just don't ask. It's inappropriate. Like figure out that it's inappropriate. Maybe if we're, even at happy hour, it's inappropriate. But yeah, I feel like, I don't know. We
asking somebody's comfort, right? Like I know individuals in our community that would take great offense to having to answer any question regarding educating somebody on LGBTQ plus issues. I also know some that would be okay with it in certain situations, right? So not making assumptions around it and maybe asking or taking people's feedback. And also you make a good point. Is it a fair, appropriate question? Is it not? Flip it. If somebody asked your straight ass this question, how would it go down? Right.
Yeah,
right.
I think that should be common sense, right? But it's like we're losing these things for whatever reason. Like at no point is it appropriate, regardless of your sexuality, gender, age, that we talk about your sex life at work. Like it's just not. It's just
totally.
And these are work settings, right? This is not even, like you said, happy hour. This is at the office. This is somebody walking up to a cubicle. It
can be. I mean, I didn't, I don't want to overstate that, like that there were so many ignorant people and all of that, because that wasn't exactly the case. But And even like I said, there's sort of a line like, okay, well, is the jewelry, sure, it's part of my queerness, but is that like, the most valid thing to like be offended that was critiqued or something? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I think there's a line there. It was really indicative of this sort of larger thing. Mm-hmm. And the boys club that was the tech side, and the fact that we were hemorrhaging people of color would start with us and leave within 6 months, women, things like that. And then myself, I was ultimately the last. I mean, there were a couple of other people who were still there after me, but, I was one of the many majority people who ended up leaving. Another way that it can manifest is in word choice, right? So being told that I'm sassy, right, is one, not wrong, but two, a very choice word that you would not use for a straight male who was opinionated and occasionally sarcastic, right? Again, it's a feminine word, and it would be rude and inappropriate to say to a woman as well. Like, oh, she's a little spicy. I was thinking spicy.
Sassy, too, yeah.
Sassy and spicy. Oh yeah, she's a little spicy and she happens to be Latina. I'm like, come on, stop. Like, why are you using words like that? Why don't you see that you're using those words? But yeah, no, I've been told that I was sassy, and I was told that I needed to make things work with this very, very aggressive coworker that I had who kept kind of like bullying me in a way. I just kept being told over and over that I needed to make it work. I needed to make it work. And in some ways, of course I did. You have to deal with difficult people at work. And that was what I was learning. But this person would almost get to physical violence and had to be asked to leave the office twice while he was heated up, and it really culminated.
But he was just being very masculine.
He was, he just got work done.
Yeah, just a little bit. Just totally. To walk it off.
Totally. And I had written things up about this person that I was just told that I was being retributive and, that I probably shouldn't report those things, that they'll handle it. Well, it didn't get handled and they just kept building up. And then I was just when people would tell me that I needed to be nice to this person to make it work, I was like, you've got to be kidding me. Does nobody see how these interactions go? Does anybody see how entitled and how fragile this person's ego is and how he's kind of looking down on me and making weird masculinity sort of, he's folding that into our conversations and the way that we interact. I don't know. I mean, it culminated with him at a holiday party, taking me aside, and he was wasted. Fine, whatever. It's a holiday party. And I don't drink, which, fine. And he knew that. And he knew that there was substance abuse in my family and things like that. But, I always get criticized for not wanting to hang out with him after work. Go figure. But even still, I had been gaslit into thinking that I was the problem up to this point after, several years there. And I'm like, okay, fine. We go back in and he's like, Geneva's going to drink tonight. And I was like, haha, no, I'm not. And he's really strong. He does CrossFit. We're talking to people and he says, Geneva's going to drink tonight again. And he grabs me and takes his Manhattan and starts dipping me back and shoves the Manhattan into my face and was trying to pour it down my throat. And I really it takes a lot to get to me, but that really did. And I dropped my stuff and was very flustered. And anyway, I thought that was the icing, the crowning thing of this monster. And I wrote an email and sent it and CC'd some people about just this behavior. Mm-hmm. And I was told that it would be best for me if I retracted it.
Ooh.
And so I did. I did retract it. And then whenever I left, which was maybe not my idea, they said that it was because I was violating the code of conduct against this person in the way that I was treating him at work, and that my sarcasm and inability to be cooperative.
Your sassiness.
My sassiness and my inability to be cooperative with him was the grounds that they were like, no, we're, so we did a mutual. I'm
not saying anything because it's so.
What the fuck?
Yeah.
What the fuck, right?
I know.
And it took me forever, being gaslit as a child that being gay, that there's something wrong with you. Mm-hmm. This situation, which swerved into a number of things, masculinity, light homophobia. I mean, I didn't give you the concrete examples to show exactly how it was so homophobic, but and therefore that's what I'm saying. It's kind of hard to put your finger on sometimes.
It's very subtle.
Is this because of my attitude, or is this because of something greater? I don't know. I was gaslit into thinking that I was the problem. And it took my therapist after and during being like, John David, yeah, you are I was being late to meetings. I was trying to work from home and not go in. I physically moved myself to another station to not even be with my team. Mm-hmm. And they kept telling me that I was the problem for doing those things. And I was like, I'm literally trying to run away from somebody who's mentally abusing me at work, mm-hmm. And that sounds so bombastic. I used to think that sounded so bombastic. Right. And so, over the top and like, you know, just whining about something. But my therapist was like, no, there's a reason you're not doing well at this job. Like they're making you miserable. Like these things are terrible. You're being really poorly treated. And it totally makes sense that, you know, it drove you into a depression, which it did, you know, and I kept getting reprimanded at work. They put me on a performance improvement plan based on things that weren't even happening. There were a few, right? Tardiness, a couple of things. And I was like, yes, those are so valid. You're totally right. Thank you. But then they were saying things that really never happened, that clearly were being fed by some of the people on my team. And that was really hard to reckon with. I was like, I'm signing an agreement, agreeing to all of these like 13 things when like 10 of them are falsehoods. And, you know, and I transcended that because once they started paying attention to what I was doing, I was fine. But I don't know. It just.
All right. So I have a question.
Yeah.
You shared the gaslit piece, that you were feeling very gaslit.
Yeah.
At what point in because previous episode, we talked about your own journey with shame. Did that factor into it? Or maybe not necessarily in this particular instance, but when you are on the receiving end of some of these either subtle or not so subtle experiences, does the shame come into that at all? And does that affect how we then interpret or what we allow?
Yeah, absolutely. The self-hatred that you try to overcome and believe is not there. You know, I'm always telling myself like, oh, you're a cheater. You're trying to cut corners. This isn't authentic, or, you know, things like that. I'm constantly cutting myself down. And that's something that I work on regularly. And, you know, it all stems from that original thing where it's not feeling gaslit, it's being gaslit. That word gets thrown around and abused so much today. It's like so overused and stuff. I realize that, but this is the technical definition of it, where somebody's telling you a reality that's not true. And, you know, sort of convincing you. I mean, I guess that's even one step further, but, yeah, that's the thing where people are like, there's something wrong with you as a matter of fact, right? They say it as a matter of fact, and it doesn't match up with your understanding of reality. And yet they do it enough that eventually you don't exactly know if they're right or not, right? That's really where the shame starts to develop. It's like, well, there is something wrong with me. And it's made even harder because you can't pinpoint it. Like you just don't know exactly what would be wrong and how to fix it.
And I'm going to speak to another way that this presents too, right? If we, and I use the word we for really any marginalized group, we're taught to not make the masses uncomfortable, right? That is the pervasive message, one of which we've talked about in a previous episode. There's a piece of this where these things go on for longer, or these things go more unnoticed even by ourselves because we are primed to not make the people around us uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Don't make the waves. And ultimately the response, and it's even harder for you as an employee because the response you keep saying after every attempt that you try to advocate for yourself is only further enabling the inappropriate behavior, which is then like coming back to like, well, damn, am I the one doing something wrong? Because these things keep happening and they just keep getting worse. I think what's fortunate for you is whether it was a therapist or some other entity, you had a resource in place that helped you find perspective of what was happening in the workplace, because you can become so accustomed to it. And it's just kind of like normally what happens that it just becomes like this skewed reality. And fortunately, you had a space where you could talk through it. And this person was able to say, actually, these things are very inappropriate. Granted, you might have been tardy and you might have been X, Y, and Z. Like,
totally.
Yes, acknowledge those things.
And I was clearly perturbed by this person and the way that he was treating me. And, you know, it got to where he was just acting like a child in the way that he would interact with me. And occasionally then I would end up stooping to his level, right? And so that's why, because I would then stoop to his level occasionally, that I was like, well, there's something valid here. And like, you know, if you want to manage people, like you have to be the bigger person. And that's what they kept telling me. And I'm like, but then he got promoted and I didn't for the product that we built together. So, you know, I don't know. I mean, I think it intersects with a lot of things, and I think people can relate because it's not just about homophobia, right? There are these subtle ways that can play into, right? And I was just sort of subtly being bullied, right? And, you know, just trying to do everything I could to fix it on my end, not realizing that there was an injustice going on. There really was. And I can't believe that I let it go on that long. But, you know, you don't want to get fired. You don't want, you know, I don't know.
There's a lot of fear around it, right? There's a lot of fear to speak on it, to advocate for yourself, to reflect back, even that physical incident. Like Nikki and I, and probably whoever is listening, like, somebody put your hands on you and tried to force alcohol. Like, that's a big problem.
And my coworker who watched it happen, afterwards, I was like, oh my God, right? Wasn't that ridiculous? Because we were talking to her at the time. And she knew that I had all these problems that I was trying to work out with him as well. And she was like, he just drank. He was just drunk. I was like, are you kidding me? If I were a woman, he would be immediately fired. Absolutely. Maybe, probably not at this company. You know, I've seen other things at that company that, you know, I won't go into detail about. But yeah, then of course, the only way they would give me my severance was if I signed a gag order. So I did, you know, and I couldn't do anything about it. And it was also at the, you know, so.
And ultimately, as we talk through these topics, we started with the topic of experiencing like the subtleties of homophobia in the workplace, but we also shifted into when you feel marginalized in the workplace for whatever that may be. And we're hoping for all of you listening that if any of this sounds familiar, that you are not alone, that there are, and now I'm like, there are resources available, but what are the resources available for that?
Yeah. If your HR is not a resource, what do you do? Right? Because and you didn't speak to that, but I'm going to go ahead and make a guess that might not have been an option. Or if it was, that they might have been the ones sending the email saying, you know what, you should rethink about whether you want to pursue this or not.
They received the initial email with all of the evidence and the entire story, and they received my retraction. Nobody contacted me about it. You know,
oh, good. That was handled. Sounds
they
like
had a new HR person at the end who I narrated the entire thing to, and they were gobsmacked. But nothing happened to that person. So they're still doing well.
And those experiences can feel so isolating and defeating. But ultimately, if you, in the first episode that we met with John David, and he talked about this 3-step process that he got out of a book, and the final step is this like light of authenticity. And I really understood it as like this light at the end of the tunnel. Well, I would apply that to this as well. Like, there are many things that are not within your control in that kind of workplace, and identifying what is within your control and potentially helping figure out what you have available to you to help get more perspective of what's happening. Because I would hope there is light at the end of the tunnel for these kinds of experiences.
I know. I mean, I spent so much time trying to make it work. And, you know, one of my best ideas that made me feel better was moving away from sitting right across from him. And then that was cited as another part of me being the problem. So,
and I think it's one of those situations, like so many that we discuss, in terms of this is happening. How do I respond? It depends, right? There might be some in places of employment where it can be solved by a discussion with the individual. Maybe they didn't know what they were doing or have the awareness of the effect it was having. There are certain situations where that's not going to do a bitty good. If anything, cause you more harm, right? There's going to be places of employment where you can have a talk with maybe the next rung up, right? There's going to be places where you can talk with HR. There's going to be places where you can physically remove yourself from the toxicity and be able to go about your business, have successful days.
Yeah. And HR is there to protect the company. Always. And when it's a company that is more evolved and, you know, walking the walk, you can get more out of HR for sure. But especially when it's smaller, it's just there to help ward off potential lawsuits. And that's very true. It's sad, but very true.
And to protect the good old boys club.
Yeah, totally. But, you know, one of the ways that I even when it's subtle and things, and I even still, right, I'm like, keep trying to backtrack it a little bit. I'm like, well, that doesn't sound homophobic enough. Like, I'm not trying to say that it was only that. You hear me saying it, right?
Yep.
And the way that I know that it was homophobic is now I work at a company that is queer, and my colleagues are queer. Everybody above me is queer. And I don't have the same problems at all. I do now, because I'm paranoid that people are throwing me under the bus, have a bit of a chip on my shoulder, and sometimes have to check my ego if I feel like somebody's like saying something like, oh, I didn't do something, or I get really paranoid. I'm like, they're all going to find out I'm a phony, right? Which is its own separate thing, which was not.
This is anxieties that have been embedded based on your past experience.
Yeah, this sounds like some trauma responses that are coming from past experiences.
100%. And I use that language to sort of talk with my boss when he's great. He gives me really good feedback. And, we've walked through this. And I was like, look, it's really hard for me to trust you and the people that I'm working with. And whenever somebody does bring up something that I may have done that was wrong or that neglectful, like, I freak out. I really do. And so that's been something that I've been working with at this company, which is helping me learn why it happens, how to be a better manager, the psychology of managing, like all of this stuff. Like, now I'm just being told, like a therapist would say, like, well, that's an attribute. It's not a flaw. That here's what people do who are like you. Here's how you talk to people and maintain respect, how you grow your self-awareness around communication, how you do these things. And I just feel so supported. And for the first time ever, I feel like I can transcend those things that I thought, because I was bullied and I'm so anxious, I have anxiety problems, and, I'm just so trigger happy, and I just like explode at people. I was just like, well, that's just how you are. Like, I don't know. And other places were constantly just like, you can't be that way. You can't be that way, without really helping me at all. Right?
Labeling you as this is who you are and you can't be that, instead of, hey, this is an aspect of how you respond. Here's some tools.
Totally. My animated...
the behavior, not the person.
Exactly. And my animated delivery, my leadership style, it's much more appreciated here, where people aren't like, ooh, you're using too many exclamation points in your emails. Are you kidding me? No, they're not kidding you. They're not kidding you. It's the same thing. Harassment against women and gays is, if you know, people criticizing your exclamation points. It's so stupid.
And you know what I appreciate, John David, is when you're saying this, even as you're retelling it, you're practicing your own self-awareness and being accountable for the things that you need to be accountable for. And even in this new position, you are able to recognize that some of your behaviors might be over-exaggerated. And then it sounds like you take it a step further of, like, if it's over-exaggerated, how do I do it differently and better? Or is it an appropriate response? And you might not be using that same language, but that's what I'm hearing. And when it comes to those trauma responses, that's so important of, is this truly about what we're talking about? Or is this like 20 years of stuff crashing into this one response because I'm triggered? And if so, like, how can I respond better?
Totally, which is great advice for work and for your
any situation.
Life. I mean, how often is the argument not about what you're talking about? It's always about three things. I forget the three. I wish I had that little nugget for everybody, but it's like, like security, respect, and I don't know, something else that
basic
everything
needs.
Everything always boils down to one of those
needs and values.
Things. And it's about the delivery. It's never about the thing, right? It's never about the insult. It's about, the insultingness of it.
John David, we've touched on several different topics for today's episode. If our listeners only took one nugget from today's time with you, what would you want that to be?
Yeah, don't let the man get you down,
Unless you're out.
Corporate life is soul sucking, and you're like, oh, we've made such strides, and look at Google and stuff. Well, I work in tech, which is one of the industries where this is supposed to be resolved or highlighted as we're all doing good and we're all in this together.
Forward thinkers
kombucha on tap. You're like, okay, Okay, but like, those issues still happen all the time. And, mine have tinges of homophobia in them. Others have tinges of anything, but it's this like tactic that other people use. And again, I think unconscious bias, even saying that, I mean, it's helpful, right? But it's absolving people of what they're doing, and it's fine. It's fine. But,
if we take it a step further,
yeah,
if we leave it there, then we're not doing anything.
I was at a company once, and we had a diversity group, and they were like, we need to call it an inclusion group instead of diversity because people might feel left out. I'm like, you mean white people? Like, what? Like, okay, fine. We won't use the word diversity, just things like that. But sorry, I digress. The main thing would be, when these things are happening, it's not always you. It's not always you. And, you should have faith in yourself that if you're noticing something, your instincts are usually correct.
There it is. He said it.
And if our listeners would like to find you, where could they find you?
You can follow me at John David Brown on Instagram for all your thirsty bear post desires.
I got to say, I held in all of my smart remarks and dirty jokes when Alyssa said to sum it up, and you said, "Don't let the man get you down." I kept all of it in.
I mean, he can pin me down, but it's about consent.
Consent is so important. On that note, thank you for allowing us into your lives and helping us make mental health relatable and a part of your everyday conversation. We truly appreciate you. And if you have not subscribed yet, head over to the YouTube channel, hit subscribe. And for show notes on today's episode, you can visit therapistuncut.com. We will see you next time on Therapist Uncut Podcast.
Peace.
Thank you for joining Therapist Uncut, a production of AMP Smart Business. To learn more about Therapist Uncut and stay up on upcoming episodes, please subscribe and follow us on social media. As a reminder, although the Therapist Uncut co-hosts are licensed therapists, they are not your therapists. This podcast is not intended to substitute professional mental health counseling. If you need professional therapy, please contact your local provider or primary care provider. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of Therapist Uncut.